Welcome, Dr. Holt.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Get my slides up here. All right. Can you just let me know that you're seeing my screen? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, it looks perfect.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for the introduction, Ivory. I'm so excited to be here. And hello, everyone. As an occupational medicine physician, I'm going to share with you some background information on burnout, but I actually want to make this a very actionable training. So I want you to walk out of here with tangible tools that you can use to start fighting back against burnout if this is something that you've been experiencing. So we're going to talk about how to go from burnout to balance. And I'm going to share with you 3 steps to permanently recover from burnout. So before we begin, I invite you to close out any tabs that are open on your computer or laptop, just so you're fully present in here for the presentation. You can turn off your mobile phone and keep it on silent. And then I always say this when I give a presentation, but really try to just open your mind and your heart to receive this information. So this training is for you if you feel like you're constantly having to choose and to make a trade-off between your private life and your work. If you feel stuck, because although you've achieved a level of success at work, unfortunately, it has come at the expense of your private life. If you're tired of feeling run down, stressed, overwhelmed from the long hours, the overbooking, patients who are disgruntled, never-ending administrative tasks, etc. And if you're ready to really stop putting yourself at the bottom of your to-do list and also stop sacrificing your health, your family life, your happiness for your career. So today, what we're going to talk about are the 3 components of what I call the burnout equation, and the top 5 reasons that healthcare workers are burning out at an alarming rate. And I'm going to share with you some statistics and share with you how the numbers, unfortunately, are trending in the wrong direction. I'm also going to share why slowing down and going within before taking action is actually going to be the fastest way for you to recover from burnout. I'm going to share what I call the burnout to bliss formula so that you can finally exit the burnout cycle for good. And then at the very end, I'm going to share 5 action steps that you can take to eliminate burnout. So I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. As Ivory mentioned, I'm board certified in occupational medicine physician. So the work that I do in the burnout space is very much a natural extension of my career in medicine. I'm also a certified life coach. I have 2 coaching certifications, and I'm also an embodiment coach as well. And in my private practice, I work with women in helping them to learn how to shift burnout from the inside out. And so the bulk of this presentation is going to be me sharing the way that I teach my clients to do that so that you also have access to this information as well. And I'm a full-time clinician. I have this part-time coaching practice. I have a podcast. I'm also working on a pilot coaching program at my academic institution. And then ultimately, I'm living a life of purpose. Now, this wasn't always the case. I'm actually a recovering OBGYN resident. So I went into OBGYN, and as many of you know, that's a very difficult specialty, not only the lifestyle, but also some of the personalities and people who sort of gravitate to that field. And although I enjoyed it, I loved women's health, it wasn't something that I could see myself doing long term. Because one night I was waiting for a delivery with my attending 2, 3 in the morning. And I realized that I was looking at myself in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, that it really wasn't ever going to get better as long as I kept the obstetrics part of my practice. And I had other interests. There were other things that I wanted to do in my life. And so I wasn't sure that that's what I wanted to do. And then I switched to occupational medicine residency. And then the second point in my career where I experienced burnout was actually my first job as an attending, as an occupational medicine physician. So I was hired to work at a large urban academic center, and we did it all. So we did employee health for not only the hospital, but also the medical and dental schools. We did workplace injuries. We had contracts with the city, with transit. So we were a very busy center. And unfortunately, into my first year in this practice as a junior attending, my medical director left, and it was just me, and it took quite a bit of time to hire someone else. And that was really the first time where I was like, okay, I don't know that medicine is my calling. I don't know if I can continue because there didn't seem to be a light at the end of the tunnel. But fortunately, during that time, I really learned about coaching. I really leaned into my faith as well. And, here I am today helping other women who might be feeling this way to get out of that feeling as well. So if you're on this call, I want to ask if you can relate to any of these things, and you can raise your virtual hand if this is you. So do you find it hard for you to disconnect from work because your mind is always on, and you find it hard to connect with family and friends when you're actually at home? Do you feel guilty for complaining about work because you almost feel like you should just be happy, you should be grateful because you've achieved this level of success that many people could only dream of? Do you also feel this constant pressure that you have to perform, and that if you worry that if you complain, people will either think you can't keep up, that there's something wrong with you, maybe you'll feel like an imposter? Do you ever find yourself wondering, well, is this it, right? Like after all of the years of the studying and the sacrificing, you thought, well, eventually it's going to get better, right? We keep telling ourselves, well, it's going to get better. It's going to get better at the next stage and at the next stage. But it's kind of the horizon just keeps getting pushed further and further out. Are your relationships on life support? So were you so busy that you maybe put off meeting someone or having a family, and now you're feeling this sense of urgency and regret? Or if you do have a family, you feel like you're missing out on all those important moments with them. Has medicine essentially taken over your life? So I want to start with just defining burnout so that we're pretty much all on the same page. So burnout is a syndrome that is characterized by high emotional exhaustion, high depersonalization, and a low sense of feeling accomplished at work. And it's not considered a mental illness or a mental health condition. It's not in the DSM-5. And I think that's important to understand. It really is a syndrome. And from the 2022 Medscape National Physician Burnout and Suicide Report, 56% of female physicians report feeling burnout versus 41% of male physicians. And these numbers are up. So last year it was 51% for female physicians and 36% for male physicians. So women are unfortunately leading the pack here when it comes to burnout, but the numbers for both men and women continue to increase. And then if we look at which specialties are most burned out, it's not really any surprise that emergency medicine, critical care, especially in light of this pandemic, that those are at the top of the list, but also OBGYN, which is, the background that I came from. And then infectious diseases, which again makes sense in light of COVID and just fear in general about infection. And now we have, new things to worry about like monkeypox and all kinds of things. So these are really the high stress specialties. And then if we look at burnout by work setting, I think it's interesting that pretty much in any work setting, whether it's outpatient, whether you're working for a healthcare organization, an HMO, you work for a hospital, part of a multi-specialty practice, academic, it really doesn't matter. The lowest number here is 39%. And that's for people who are in solo practice. So they have a little bit more independence. But pretty much if you work in any of these practice settings, there's a good chance that 40% or more of the physicians you're encountering in these settings are burned out. And women are actually more affected by burnout than men. So if we look at the data from the AMA Coping with COVID-19 for Caregivers survey, 49% of women reported experiencing burnout, 39% reported anxiety and depression, And then 42% reported an increased stress due to work overload. And I think, it's interesting. We could, have certainly a conversation about why women would be more affected by burnout than men. I think certainly there are some societal factors. Certainly women tend to have, two jobs. So you may have a career that you work, during working hours, but then you come home and, your job as a wife or a mom, doesn't end, you don't punch out from doing that, right? So that is probably impacting the numbers for why women feel more burned out than men. And then this statistic I find very troubling, and it's a quarter of clinicians said that they would probably be leaving medical practice in 3 years, 25% of clinicians. So that's a pretty scary statistic for so many reasons. And one that troubles me the most is that, well, right now there's already a healthcare shortage where we know that, but ultimately the populations that are going to suffer the most are those underserved populations, those rural populations that are already hurting. And now they're facing losing even more people who can serve them. So I want to talk about what I'm calling the burnout equation. I haven't heard it, put quite this way. So, but I thought about it, and I think this is kind of a really good way to see it graphically and understand like what exactly are the factors that are contributing to burnout. So there's 3 components of this equation, if you will. So it's workplace factors, personality factors, and then lifestyle factors. All 3 of these are contributing to what someone experiences as burnout. So work-related factors are when you work in a high pressure or chaotic environment like medicine, you feel like you have little or no control over your work. You might have unclear or overly demanding job expectations. There's a heavy workload, but with a lot of time constraints. So you may not have enough time to get everything done that you need to. There may be technology challenges. I was talking with a client a couple weeks ago, and she was telling me about, this EMR system, the health record system that they were using, and it wasn't the one that she was told that they would be using when she was hired. So she went in thinking she was going to have Epic, which is pretty awesome. And then she ended up having a different system, which is a lot harder to use. And so, of course, that contributes to burnout and stress because of the challenges with that particular EMR system. In medicine, there's often moral or ethical dilemmas, and not being recognized or rewarded for your performance is also a huge issue as well. So ultimately, when we're looking at work-related factors, there's a chronic imbalance of the high job demands and the resources that you are provided. Personality factors that can contribute to burnout, these include being a high achiever, which if you're in medicine, if you're a physician, if you're a nurse practitioner or physician assistant, or anyone who will come across this recording, you're probably someone who would be categorized as a high achiever. If you're someone who has more of a type A personality, if you're more of a perfectionist, if you have, if someone has a more pessimistic view of the world or a more pessimistic view of even themselves, they're more prone to burnout. If you have this desire that you need to be in control, that you need to be the one sort of managing everything and everyone, and if you're really reluctant to delegate and to give responsibility to other people because you feel like no one can do it as good as I can do it, or that you can only trust yourself to get the job done. And then lifestyle factors that contribute to burnout, and we're going to talk more about these towards the end of the presentation. But poor sleep habits, not having time for relaxation, not having time for socialization, having a lack of those close supportive relationships, people that you can really come to and count on when you're going through something difficult, and then just taking on too many responsibilities, both at work, but also maybe in your personal life. And burnout has high personal cost for workers, but it also has high social and economic cost for organizations and also just for society as a whole. So if we look at the cost of burnout for workers, it could be in the form of occupational injuries, so being more prone to getting injured on the job, alcohol and substance use, higher rates of depression, anxiety. Unfortunately, we're seeing an increase in suicide in health workers. Recently, there were just two nurses in California who committed suicide. And then unfortunately also regret. So a sense of regret for going into medicine in the first place. Recently there was data that, physicians will often encourage people to not go into medicine or say that they wish they had not gone into medicine or that they had made a different decision. I hear that all the time, actually. And there can be also a lack of professional development as well. And the high cost of burnout for employers are decreased quality of care. So if someone is burned out, they're probably not able to give their best to their patients. There can be increased patient safety incidents. We've seen data on that, increase in malpractice claims, lower patient satisfaction scores, absenteeism and presenteeism. So absenteeism, just meaning people calling out of work, not showing up to work because they're just so depleted and so exhausted. And then presenteeism is when people are showing up to work, but they're not fully present at work. They're actually distracted. They're not doing their best work. And ultimately, it leads to increased turnover and also attrition, a high attrition rate. And the number, the dollar amount that it costs to onboard and credential a physician, I read this a while ago, but it's something like $300,000, $350,000. So imagine that you're losing your physicians due to burnout, and you've spent approximately $350,000 to onboard and bring this physician on in the first place. So that's why it's really important that institutions and employers are on board with burnout recovery efforts, because it's actually to their benefit for multiple reasons, as listed in this slide. So if, again, we go back to our burnout equation, what it means is to reduce burnout over here, we really have to address all of the factors that are contributing to burnout. But the interesting thing is when most people think about burnout recovery, or when we talk about burnout recovery, we tend to focus on controlling the workplace factors, right? That's the thing that comes to mind first. So, we're fixing the schedule, getting a better EMR system, working on, professional training and all of these things. And it's not that that's bad or wrong, but oftentimes the physicians who are experiencing the burnout, they're not the ones in position of leadership. They're not in position of management. They're not able to just say, well, I'm not seeing, this many patients in a day. I'm not going to have my schedule look like this anymore. They don't have the ability to make those decisions because that's coming from a higher level, management level, maybe even a C-suite level. And so oftentimes they realize that, hey, I can't control the workplace factors. So the default is, well, I either need to quit this particular job and try to find something better, or maybe I'm just not cut out for medicine. Maybe I just need to get out of medicine. And we are seeing that. The great resignation, so to speak, that has affected so many industries also is affecting medicine now as well. And as I mentioned earlier, 25% of clinicians are thinking about leaving within the next 3 years. So what I want to suggest is that it's not that we don't focus on workplace factors at all, because obviously all three of these are going to be important in reducing burnout on this side of the equation. But we need to think about burnout recovery from a different perspective, one where the physician, the clinician, the nurse practitioner, whoever feels empowered that they can actually start shifting burnout immediately, that they don't have to wait for something to change in the work environment before they feel better. And that's really looking at the personality factors and the lifestyle factors. But when physicians were asked if they felt their personality type was a contributing factor to burnout, it's interesting that the majority of physicians either said no or that they were unsure. So it's clearly not something that is at the top of mind when a physician is thinking about burnout and their experience of burnout and how to actually solve it. So ultimately, the real problem when it comes to burnout and burnout recovery is that we're not putting enough focus on the internal environment, and we're trying to throw everything at fixing the workplace environment. And trying to fix the workplace environment without addressing what's going on in the internal environment, I'm talking about those personality and lifestyle factors, it's not going to be the pathway to permanent burnout recovery. So it's possible that you can address workplace factors But if you haven't taught a physician or another clinician how to address the internal factors that are contributing, yes, there will be some effect, but it won't be as permanent and long lasting as if you taught that clinician how to manage their internal environment, which is what I'm going to talk about in the second part of this presentation, how to manage that. Because even if we didn't address the workplace factors, if you taught someone how to manage their inner environment, they could still have the power and the agency to shift their experience of burnout. Now, it's possible that that might lead them to the conclusion that they maybe need to go to a different job or, do something different altogether. But what I have found, what I've experienced just from my own experience of being burned out and also working with clients, is once you really address those internal environment factors, everything around you starts to shift as well. So I want to explain this concept of depth first and direction second. So this is basically the framework that underpins a lot of the work that I do. And this is something that I learned from my mentor, Jenna Ward. So I do want to give her credit for this concept. And it's really this. When I talk about depth, I'm talking about feminine. And when I talk about direction, I'm talking about masculine. Now, there could be both men and women watching this training. So what I want to say is that as a man or a woman, we all have feminine and masculine components. It's just that as women, we have more of that feminine. As men, we have more of that. Men have more of the masculine. But unfortunately, for society, we've tended to sort of value the masculine trait of direction and something that's more linear, taking more action. We tend to prioritize that. And it's not a bad thing because, of course, that's what helps us to move forward in our lives and in our careers. But we do that at the expense of the depth. And we don't often connect with that depth aspect of our personality. So that's like the slowing down part. And I want to be very clear, this isn't about making, one right or wrong or one superior to one or the other. It's really about saying that we need both. And part of the problem of burnout is we are completely imbalanced. We are completely heavily into the taking action, the direction, the hustle, the striving, the doing, and we're not slowing down enough. So when I talk about depth, I mean going within and becoming resourced internally before taking action. So you're still going to have to take action, right? You're still going to have to show up. You're still going to have to see the patients. You're still going to have to do the charting. You're still going to have to do all these things. But it's doing it from a place where you actually have fuel in your tank, so to speak, or your cup is full instead of empty. Because it's very hard to help someone or to show up and do your best work if you're literally running on fumes or if you're running on E. It's also understanding that inner momentum and really generating that inner momentum is actually what's going to lead to external or outer momentum. So a lot of people are trying to create external momentum without really having anything from within to generate that external momentum. And it's not that you can't do it, but it's harder. It's like trying to roll the ball uphill instead of, you're starting at the top and you're just letting sort of momentum and gravity take place. So it's really filling your cup, getting to the top of that mountain, so to speak, and then letting the momentum just naturally take place. It's also enjoying the journey instead of just focusing on getting there, on just getting to the final destination. And it requires you to really slow down to do that. And there is a paradox that when we actually slow down and take the time to lay that proper foundation, that actually causes us to speed up. And it sounds a little bit counterintuitive. Sometimes we think, well, if I slow down, if I take time to, do that self-care, if I take the time to, maybe meditate for 5 minutes before I go in and see the next patient, I'm going to get behind. But actually, if you take time to replenish yourself first, you'll actually be able to move faster and farther. And when you actually take this approach, more of a depth first approach, you will experience less stress, more ease, more flow. You'll have a heightened intuition, heightened skills of discernment. You'll have more access to your natural skills and gifts. A lot of times we're so connected with the skills that we sort of acquire, that we learn, and we're not really connected to the things that we're naturally good at, the things that we've been blessed with. And so once you slow down, you'll actually become more connected to those natural skills. You'll learn to embody or implement healthy boundaries with not only yourself, but everyone and everything in your environment. You'll be able to receive more easily. So receiving help, for example, instead of thinking you have to do everything yourself. Your relationships will become much more reconnected. And that's not just like personal relationships, that includes your relationships with your patients as well. Because they know, right? They know when we're stressed, when we're rushing, when we can't spend that time. And patients are really craving that. They're really craving that human to human experience with us as clinicians. But often when we're burned out, we're stressed, we don't have the time for that, right? And then ultimately you'll be more fully expressed as a human being. So let's talk about the burnout to bliss formula. And there's 3 components of that. It's revealing your burnout patterns, releasing any blocks or limiting beliefs, and then what I call recreating your environment. So let's start with reveal. And this is really where you're going to understand your unproductive thoughts and your behavior patterns so that you can discern your next best steps. Because here's the thing, you can't access your highest and best level of thinking when you are stuck in the problem, right? When you're stuck in, woe is me, life is horrible, you know, you're stuck in confusion, you can't actually see your next best step. So that's why we need to reveal, we need to understand. So here's the problem, just the way that we are designed as human, we have a lot of thoughts that are at a completely subconscious or unconscious level. So it's this iceberg model where 5% of our thoughts are coming from the conscious mind or our rational mind or prefrontal cortex, only 5%. The other 95% of our thinking, which is driving our actions, our inactions, and our reactions, is underneath the surface. So it's kind of like an iceberg, right? We're not readily aware of all of these subconscious thoughts that we hold. But if I said to you, well, do you think it's the 5% or the 95% that's actually running the show? Just based on math, you'd say, well, it has to be that 95%. That's actually what's driving a lot of what's showing up in your life and the way you're showing up and how you are behaving. And ultimately, that's what's determining the results that you're getting. So a belief is just a thought that you've practiced. So you just keep thinking it again and again. And we have something like 60,000 thoughts a day. And you're not aware of every single thought, obviously, because our brain is getting so much information, so much data. You know, our senses are picking up all kinds of things. Like right now, you're hearing this presentation, you're listening to me talk, but maybe there's a car honking out, you know, like there is outside my window, or maybe there's the air conditioning whirring or, you know, buzzing in the background, or maybe you can hear the sound of something else. Even though all of that is going on around you, you're not actually tuned into everything that's happening around you. And so it's important to understand that the way the mind works, a lot of what you are thinking about or what you're conscious of is really based on your past and your programming. Many of your beliefs were created at a subconscious level very early on in life. So from the time you were in utero, about the 3rd trimester until the age of 7 or so, 7 to 9, your brain is pretty much like a sponge, right? We know that. So we've seen kids who are basically repeating everything that they hear adults say, sometimes embarrassing us, right? They are recording, they're parroting, you know, basically mimicking things that they see their parents doing. And it's because their brain is like a sponge. They're a walking subconscious mind. That's another way to think about it. And it just means that their brain is actually in this state of hypnosis, which just means they're walking around in the theta brainwave state. So if we were to, you know, put some EEG leads on them, we would see that they're mostly in theta. So that means they're just picking up and receiving so many things that they're not choosing. So when you think about yourself, your beliefs and where they came from, obviously your family of origin, so parents, siblings, other family members, also the school system that you went to, so teachers, maybe classmates and things that they said. If you're part of a faith tradition, you know, church, temple, mosque, other religious institutions, and of course, just society, right? That's a huge, huge influence on all of us. The government, media, social media is a huge influence on us these days. And we have seen these trends over the years where something that was, cool or acceptable 50 years ago, now it's not anymore. So these trends and what's considered normal, what's considered good, it changes over time. So kids today are going to have a very different programming than maybe what you experienced growing up in the past. And it's so important to understand that our beliefs are actually often a misrepresentation of experiences. So as children, we didn't have the emotional maturity to understand everything that was happening around us or even to process it correctly. And so when something negative happens or something challenging happens, like maybe a divorce or, a parent walked out, kids will say, oh, I was the reason, right? They'll centralize themselves. They'll make themselves wrong and basically blame themselves. So this is where a lot of these limiting beliefs come from. It comes from this time period when we were very young and we were misinterpreting the experiences that were happening all around us. Here are some common limiting beliefs that I see in my clients, and maybe you recognize some of these thoughts, the voice that's in your head. It's too hard. This isn't fair. I'm not sure. I don't know how. What if I'm wrong? It's easy for him or it's easy for her, but it's not for me. Maybe God is holding out on me. I can't have what I want. Or this thought that I'm working so hard and nothing is working out for me. So see if you recognize any of those thoughts in yourself. And so the solution in this phase of the equation is you want to start to understand the behavioral patterns that you have that are contributing to burnout. You also want to start excavating your limiting beliefs. So when you catch yourself having a thought, this isn't fair, really investigating that thought. Where is it coming from? Where did I first have that thought? Where did I learn that from? What exactly isn't fair? And really exploring that. And always when we're doing this kind of mindset work, we want to do it from a place of curiosity and never from a place of judging ourselves or shaming ourselves. So always kind of almost like that observer effect, like just kind of watching your brain with curiosity and just like, why am I choosing to believe that thought? Of all the thoughts that I could believe, why am I choosing that one? And then you want to do the work to start reframing some of those limiting beliefs and anchor into new ones. So the second phase is where we're doing releasing. So releasing these patterns and beliefs. So there's oftentimes traumas that we've experienced. And I believe a lot of us have experienced trauma, even if we don't identify with capital T trauma, like the big traumas, like being beaten or molested or, whatever. A lot of people have experienced small traumas. And I heard a definition that really resonated with me, which is that trauma is anything that, basically was traumatic to you. So one person might have an experience of being laughed at, standing in front of the classroom, and that's a traumatic experience for them. Whereas for another child, they just laughed along with them and just moved on with their life and it never affected them. So it's important to understand that, we experience trauma throughout our lives. And certainly in the medical education system, in the medical practice system, we've experienced trauma, right? Maybe being, what we used to call being pimped, for answers, or maybe even being talked down to by a senior resident or, a program director or whatever. A lot of us have experienced that trauma. So it's really the release phase is about identifying those traumas, those triggers, and then releasing them. So the problem is, oftentimes we're overthinking, we're overworking, we're overdoing, and we're really disconnected from who we are at the core. Now, for women, that could be your heart, your feelings, your intuition, your bodily wisdom, even your menstrual cycle, because for many of us, we've been raised to think that that's just a nuisance and it's something we just don't want any part of. But ultimately, there's this anger, this frustration, this bitterness that's lingering and lurking beneath the surface. And oftentimes we suppress our emotions or we buffer them. So when I say buffer, I mean using anything to avoid feeling something. So let's say you're feeling angry about something that happened in the clinic, but you're not comfortable with feeling angry. You might buffer with chocolate. You might buffer with Netflix. You might buffer with going online and shopping and spending a lot of money. You might buffer with alcohol. So it's using some substance or something else or doing some other activity to basically bypass or avoid an emotion that you're uncomfortable with feeling. And part of the problem is that we don't know how to surrender, let go of control, and just sort of let let our feelings guide us and just feel in that moment. So again, these are the coping mechanisms that we default to. Instead of what I call healing, we go to coping. So avoiding, sometimes we actually just resist feeling the emotion altogether, suppressing, bypassing, there's this sort of what I call toxic positivity, where we feel like we can't be, anything less than positive, or that means something negative about us. So we're trying to almost bypass the way that we're feeling. And again, numbing out with various things. But when uncomfortable emotions are welcomed, instead of shutting them down or numbing them out, it actually does something called completing the cycle. So if we look at an animal in nature and an animal is being chased, like let's say an animal is being chased by another animal for prey, and let's say that animal survives the attack, it will actually release or discharge the energy from being chased. So it might shake for a little bit, it might, just be in freeze mode for a little bit, but ultimately it will complete that quote unquote trauma, that cycle of trauma, get up, shake it off, and move on with its life, right? And we're not seeing animals in the wild with like PTSD. But unfortunately, as humans, we have the ability to short circuit the way our body would naturally process trauma or naturally process uncomfortable emotions, and we'll shut it down. And what happens is the negative emotion doesn't go anywhere. It just stays inside of us as frozen tension. And what happens is when we don't learn to process these traumas, process these negative emotions, it basically blocks us. And instead of having the energy, the space to do other things, it's kind of tied up in this stuck emotion, if that makes sense. And so embodiment is the key to that liberation. And when I talk about embodiment, I mean really inhabiting yourself, and that's the most authentic and powerful version of yourself. It's allowing your true nature to become fully actualized. And it's really understanding that your body is the vessel between sort of the spiritual nature that we all have and your human nature. And so really just allowing whatever you're feeling in the body, becoming more sensitive to what's happening in the body, it actually leads to more clarity, healing, and transformation. And doing embodiment work is actually a very effective approach to burnout. So when I talk about embodiment, these are some of the practices that I'm referring to. So regularly dropping from the head, from thinking, overthinking, overanalyzing, logic mode, dropping from that into the body. So instead of being so connected with what we're thinking and ruminating and thought spinning, it's just dropping into the body and saying, well, how am I feeling, right? Just how am I feeling in this moment? And then really allowing yourself to connect with that feeling and just feel it. Even if it's an uncomfortable feeling, we have to get good at feeling those too, because life is actually 50-50. It's not supposed to be 100% positive, right? So it's really just realizing that we're not striving for 100% feeling good all the time, because no one's ever going to get there. It's understanding that we want to be at 50-50. And when we're in the negative 50%, we allow it, we deal with it. It's about being comfortable with the unknown, not having all of the answers in front of you. It's also learning to source safety and validation from within instead of trying to get it from the external environment, right? So trying to get it from your employer or trying to get it from, someone who's evaluating you or giving you feedback. It's really learning how to give that to yourself. And ultimately, when you learn how to do that, you'll feel whole again. And the third component of this Burnout to Bliss formula is now recreating your environment. This is like the fun part. It's really creating a life by design. You're going to develop new habits, new skills, and learn how to create healthier boundaries, because that's a big missing factor for a lot of us who are experiencing burnout, and ultimately embodying or becoming this new version of yourself. So the problem is that so many people think the circumstances of their life are actually responsible for their life. So burnout is actually a circumstance. And a circumstance is just something that is outside of your control. And ultimately, it's not the circumstance itself that is creating the results in our lives. It's really our thoughts about it and how we approach these circumstances. A lot of people just feel powerless. They're not able to do anything about it. And they're very heavily, again, focused on the external environment, and they're neglecting their inner environment. And then they're not accepting responsibility or radical responsibility for the results that are showing up. Here are the things you actually cannot control. You can't control other people. So just give that up. I know it's something that I have tried to do in the past and it's just not possible. So we just need to let that go. We can't control the timing of our lives. We don't know how much time we get on this earth, or when something will happen for us. So that's just something we have to sort of give up. You can't control what your employer is doing. You can't control the government, of course, other institutions, and just overall patterns in society and patterns in the world, right? There's so much going on right now around us. These are scary times that we're living in, and we can't control any of it. But here are the things that you can control. You can control how you're thinking. You can control how you're feeling. I'm going to show you that in the next slide. You can control the actions that you take. You can ultimately control your results, and then also how you show up. So I want to share with you, this is the Life Coaching School model. This is created by Brooke Castillo, who is also one of my mentors. And I am certified through the Life Coach School. And I love this model because it's basically rooted in cognitive behavioral therapy, but it teaches us that, it's basically the cognitive triad, that our thoughts produce our feelings generate our actions. But this is expanded a little bit beyond the cognitive triad in that it's the circumstances that we're in that are triggering our thinking about them. So we can have a circumstance of, the COVID pandemic, and then we have a thought about it. So early on in the pandemic, if we give two different models, we had some people who were, terrified of what was going on. They took it seriously. They went to the store, they stocked up on toilet paper. So we had, that version of someone who was preparing for the pandemic and preparing for quarantine. But then we also saw other people, maybe who were younger, who wanted to go on spring break because this was happening right around March. And so there were also people who were just, they were just in the moment. They were at the beach, on spring break, living their best life. And that was a different model, right? So the circumstance was the same, right? The circumstance was the pandemic, but you had two totally different thoughts about it, right? One thought of, I need to prepare, this might be the end of the world. And another thought is, this might be the end of the world, so I need to, enjoy myself while I can, right? So it's your thoughts about your circumstance that lead to the feelings. So the feelings for the people who are stocking up was maybe, anxious or fearful. And the feelings for the spring break revelers was excitement or, fun. And that led to different actions. So we have the people who were standing in line at the store as the lines wrapped around outside. I remember the lines at like Trader Joe's going down the block. And then you had the people who were just, again, on the beach with not a care in the world, not thinking about stocking up, not thinking about any of that. And ultimately, it's our actions that create our results. So maybe the people who were on the beach ended up getting COVID, and the people who were staying at home and following the quarantine guidelines didn't. All right. So that's just a quick example of the model. I love this quote from Byron Katie, that as long as you think that the cause of your problems is out there, as long as you think that anyone or anything is responsible for your suffering, then the situation is hopeless. And so what you really want to do is understand that your power in any circumstance really comes from putting your focus on what is in your control. And again, that's your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, and how you're showing up. So that involves learning effective time management and charting strategies, making your self-care a non-negotiable. That's how you're going to fill that tank up, right? It's understanding your cycles, your seasons, and synchronizing to them. And when I talk about cycles and seasons, it might seem that I'm only talking to the women, but actually men have cycles as well in a season. It's just their cycle is 24 hours typically, and a woman's cycle is 28 days. So our energy level fluctuates over a 28-day cycle. For men, it's over a 24-hour cycle. So it's really whether you're a man or a woman, understanding what that cycle is and synchronizing yourself to them so that you are getting the most out of it. It's also embodying, again, these healthy boundaries and redefining success on your terms and consciously creating it. So these are the top 5 causes of burnout. It's lack of clarity. So it's when you don't understand your thoughts, beliefs, your patterns of behavior that are keeping you stuck and keeping you in the burnout cycle. It's the lack of self-connection. So that's when you're really struggling with guilt, judging yourself, imposter syndrome, instead of coming from a place of self-compassion, self-love, and really developing trust in yourself. Lack of productivity, I hear this a lot from clients where they say, I don't have enough time. They have this story about there just isn't enough time. We all get 24 hours in the day, right? So oftentimes it's not the fact that you don't have enough time, it's the stories or the thoughts that you have about time, and not having an effective time management system to manage the time that you do have. So again, it's important to understand what time is the most effective way to manage it and use it. Lack of burnout-proof habits. This is when you don't have a consistent self-care practice or routine to replenish yourself, and it just amplifies burnout and exhaustion even more. So this is falling into that category of lifestyle factors in the burnout equation. And then a lack of boundaries. Again, it's when you don't have clear standards for how you're going to engage with other people, with the world, and also with yourself. And so the way you're going to eliminate those steps is you're going to develop clarity. And that comes from really understanding your thoughts, understanding your needs, understanding who you are as a person and what you want out of life. It's also self-connection. So getting more to the core of your feelings. It's productivity, learning an effective time management system, and really trying to correct those stories that you have about not having enough time. It's also developing those burnout-proof habits and making them a consistent part of your daily and weekly routine. And it's also embodying those boundaries. So I did give you all a workbook for this presentation. And the workbook has 5 exercises that's going to walk you through questions to really address each of these pillars here. So in the first exercise, you're really going to get more clarity, again, clarity about what you want out of life, what your current beliefs are about your life, and really moving you to a space of more openness, more awareness. I always say awareness is the first step. It's really hard to change something if you're not aware of where you're starting from in the first place. The second exercise is going to be about self-connection. So really connecting with what you're proud of, but also not just positive feedback, but also critical. I don't want to say criticism, but being honest with yourself. So there may be some things that you planned to get to, that you wanted to get to, but you just didn't get to it, or you didn't do it as effectively as you could. So it's giving yourself, appropriate feedback and honest feedback. Productivity. This is from my planner, which is the time management system that I share with clients. But it's really, I love that it's an inverted triangle, because again, it's really, enforcing that concept of depth before we go to the direction. So it's aligning with where you are energetically and in your cycle. It's also setting an intention for how you want to feel for that week, or maybe even for the day. And then it's also fueling. So deciding before you launch into action, what are the things you're going to do to fuel your cup for that week? I recommend that people plan the fun activities first, like plug those things on your calendar first. I know I've experienced that when I actually do things that are for self-care or for enjoyment or for fun, then I come home, and if I have to work on something, I'm so much more efficient, because again, I have that fuel to propel me forward. And then after doing all of these things, after going deep, the fourth step is then action. And it's action with constraint. So it's not having these to-do lists that have 50 items on them. It's really drilling down to the most essential things that only you can do, that are absolutely necessary for you to do, and understanding the things that you don't have to do, the things that you can delegate off your plate to someone else, and being able to receive that help. The fourth exercise is all about developing those burnout-proof habits. So I'm sharing with you the 5 types of self-care: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and social. And then having you sort of do a self-assessment. Which of these areas do I not usually tap into? Am I not usually spending my time doing, right? And then you'll have some exercises to explore what are some of those things that you can do, and actually create a checklist for that. That you can commit to, or just having some items at the ready, like, okay, for mental self-care, maybe I'm going to pick up that book off the shelf that I purchased, a couple months ago, and finally do that intellectual self-care. Or maybe it is, I'm going to spend, 5 minutes in prayer, 5 minutes in meditation. Maybe I'm going to do some exercise for physical self-care. I'm going to book that massage. So it's really coming up with a plan that you're going to stick to, and realizing that self-care is actually non-negotiable. It's non-negotiable. You have to make time for it. And then boundaries, which is really important. This exercise is going to walk you through a particular situation that you're dealing with where maybe you don't have a boundary, or the boundary is kind of weak or kind of flimsy. It's going to walk you through to start exploring how can you start creating a boundary around that situation, who might be impacted by the boundary, and who do you need to be basically to embody and enforce that boundary. So we're coming to the end of the talk, and just to summarize what we've discussed so far, only 1/3 of the burnout equation has to do with workplace factors, only 1/3. So the other 2/3, which in my opinion are more impactful to focus your attention on, is really that internal environment, which is the personality factors and the lifestyle factors, because it's really not possible to permanently recover from burnout if you're only trying to focus on what's happening out there in the workplace environment. That's never going to be your most effective point of change. It's always going to be coming from the inside out. And that's why a depth before direction approach is the way forward. And once you identify your patterns and your beliefs, once you sort of liberate those old wounds, those traumas from your childhood or from your medical education, and once you start to really embody a new identity, a new way of life, that's how you go from burnout to balance. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you so much for being here. And if there's any questions, I will take those now. But I also just want to leave you with this slide for how to reach me, my website, my email, and I also have a podcast, which is available on all the major platforms. If you'd like to just learn more about my approach to burnout, feel free to listen to that as well. All right, so, go ahead.
Oh, this was amazing. Oh my gosh, I learned a lot, and I'm not even in the medical field, Dr. Holt. Very, very helpful. We do have a question in the chat. Does your diet affect your burnout/stress levels? Great question.
Yeah, that is a good question. It absolutely, what you're consuming. So whether that's mentally, emotionally, physically, absolutely, that can affect your level of stress and burnout as well. And oftentimes when people are burned out, that's part of that physical self-care that I mentioned. So they're maybe not eating the best foods. They're eating things that are just quick, something that they can just grab and go. Because for me, cooking is a form of self-care. I love cooking. So on Sundays, I do my grocery shopping, I go to church, and then later in the evening, afternoon, I will spend the time cooking. And it really is a form of self-care for me. And I enjoy eating the food that I cook. I know it's healthy. I know it's going to nourish me throughout the week. So if you're burned out and you're so exhausted and you're not having the time to do that, of course, the types of food that, someone might be eating, if it's more inflammatory in nature, instead of something that's healthy, yes, that can also increase, sugar we know is inflammatory. Flour is inflammatory. We also know, yes, alcohol. Yes, that can help as well. Taking alcohol out of the diet. Now, I'm not saying you can't drink, of course, or can't enjoy a drink or a cocktail or whatever you prefer. But yes, it's understanding that these things will affect your stress level. Yes, and the question too is looking at whether you're buffering. Do you find yourself buffering with alcohol? Because sometimes people will have that glass of wine at the end of the day because it's like, oh, I had a busy day. I deserve this drink, right? I deserve the glass of wine. So if you find yourself doing that, that's also a clue that it's actually just perpetuating the belief that, yeah, I deserve this. And it keeps you stuck in that loop. So.
And I think also something that I learned from this session is to be able to be aware of your mental and your physical self, with that, and being able to, when you're going out into the medical field and you are on the front line and you are, saving people and helping people, that is your MO, your number one, but it's making sure you're aware of how it is starting to affect you.
Yes.
Like you had mentioned, someone going into work and starting a job thinking they're going to be using one system and then it's another system and having, it's just taking the time to be aware of yourself when you start to notice your stress levels, if you start to notice that you're not sleeping throughout the night, getting enough sleep. I think they say is that adults should get maybe 7 to 9 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
You get that, and making sure you're drinking enough water, and taking time to mentally sometimes take yourself out of something when you need to, even if it's, and I know medical professionals, all of you are so incredibly busy, but taking that time, maybe 15 minutes just to go outside and get some fresh air, to, just, take everything away, and just 15 minutes to breathe in and breathe out, and go back in to continue saving lives.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I know everyone who goes into healthcare, it's because they are altruistic. It's because they care about people. It's because they want to help people. They want to love and serve people. And sometimes, though, it falls into the unhealthy side of like the martyr, right? The over-giving type, the putting yourself last and putting everyone else before you. And while that sounds good, right? This noble idea of self-sacrifice, you can't possibly be giving your best if you are completely maxed out, if you're completely tapped out, right? And so it's not about saying, well, it's not about being selfish, which I think sometimes we're afraid, like, is it going to be selfish if I take, that break, or if I, eat my lunch instead of just keep, going on to the next person? And it's not selfish. It's actually, like you said, Ivory, it's doing what you need to do, taking that 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then coming back with like a renewed sense of energy and a renewed sense of purpose. So you can only give for so long until the well runs dry. And patients absolutely know when we are not at our best. They know, they have that sense. My doctor is stressed out today. She's not in the mood today. I've had patients tell me that about, they've had experiences maybe with their primary doctor, and they may share like, oh, and, she was really short with me, or she had this going on. So they know, they pick it up.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Oh my gosh. Well, I just have to thank you for such a great presentation, and providing so much informative and beneficial information. As I mentioned in the beginning of our program, we did record this, and so it will be on our YouTube channel, and we will be sharing it with everyone. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Holt.
You're welcome.
Your support. Take care, everyone.
All right. Thank you.